Well, I hope everybody had a good 4th of July, but we are now past that. It's even though this article was posted about a day or two ago, so it says we Americans have passed the July 4th weekend of 2020 humiliated as almost as never before. We had one collective project this year, and that was to crush the COVID-19, and we failed that. On Wednesday, we had about 50,000 new positive tests, a record. Other nations are beating the disease while our infections lines shoot upward as sharply as they did in March. This failure will lead to many other failures. A third of Americans show signs of clinical anxiety or depression, according to the Census Bureau. Suspected drug overdose deaths have surged by 42% in May, and small businesses, colleges, and community hubs will close. At least Americans are not in denial about the nation's turmoil of the last 3 months. Only the Repug supporters are. According to a Pew survey, 71% of Americans are angry about the state of the country right now, and 66% are fearful. Only 17% are proud, and the 17% are the inbreeding rednecks that support Donald. Americans are reacting in two positive ways. We're seeing incredible shifts in attitudes towards race. Roughly 60% of Americans now believe that African Americans face a great deal or a lot of discrimination. People have been waiting for a white backlash since the riots or since the statue started toppling. There isn't much, if any, evidence of a backlash. There's evidence of a forelash. Second, Americans have decided to get rid of 45. His mishandling of the COVID-19 hurt him among seniors. His racist catcalls in a time of racial reckoning have damaged him among many groups. Of course, I'll be one of the people that will be delighted when 45 goes, but it's worth pointing out that it wasn't only because of 45 that Americans never really locked down and then started moving around again in late April. It also wasn't 45 who went out to bars in Tempe, Austin, and Los Angeles in June. It wasn't 45 who put on hospital gowns and told American people you could suspend the lockdowns if your cause was just. Once you told people they could suspend the lockdown for one thing, they were going to suspend it for others. Our fixation on the awfulness of 45 has distracted us from the larger problems and rendered us strangely passive in the face of them. Sure, this was a Repug failure, but it was also a collective failure, and it follows a few decades of collective failures. On the day 45 leaves office, we'll still have a young generation with worse life prospects than their parents had faced. We'll still have a cultural elite that knows little about people in the red America and daily sends the message that they are legitimate. We still have yawning inequalities, residential segregation, crumbling social capital, and a crisis in family formation. 45's rise in 2016 was a symptom of all these crises, long before he had a chance to become an additional cause to them. What's the core problem? Damon Linker is onto a piece of it. It amounts to a refusal on the part of lots of Americans to think in terms of the social whole, of what's best for the community, or of the common or public good. Each of us thinks we know what's best for ourselves, and they don't. I would add that this individualism, autonomism, and selfishness is downstream from a deeper crisis of legitimacy. In 1970, in a movement like our own, Irving Kristol wrote, "In the same way as men cannot for long tolerate a sense of spiritual meaninglessness in their individual lives, so they cannot for long accept a society in which power, privilege, and property are distributed according to some morally meaningful criteria." A lot of people look around at the conditions of this country and how black Americans are treated, how communities are collapsing, how Washington doesn't work, and none of it makes sense. None of this inspires faith or confidence, and none of it do they feel a part. If you don't breathe the spirit of the nation, if you don't have a fierce sense of belonging to each other, you're not going to sacrifice for the common good. We're confronted with a succession of wicked problems, and it turns out we're not even capable of putting on a frickin' mask. In the days leading up to this July 4th weekend, I had been thinking about the scene in Good Will Hunting. We've seen Will perform all these mathematical feats and flights of verbal brilliance, but the Robin Williams character sits him down on the park bench and confronts him with a rot at the core of his character. "I look at you." Yeah, I remember this line, and basically they're quoting the line from that movie when Robin Williams looks at Matt Damon's character and says, "I look at you. I don't see an intelligent, confident man." He says, "I see a cocky, scared kid." The last 3 years have been like that Robin Williams speech for a whole nation, an intervention, a truth telling. I had hopes that the crisis would bring us together, but it's made everything harder and a lot worse. And now I worry less about the populism, or a racial or a radical wokeness than about a pervasive loss of national faith. What's lurking? I hope somewhere deep down inside is a shared ferocious love for our common country and a vision for the role America could play as the great pluralist. Um, um, yeah, pluralist beacon of the 21st century. July 4th would have been a good day to find that faith, and we probably didn't find it anyway.